I am Nora Bennett, 36, a florist who once sold her shop to keep my parents' roof from caving in. On a quiet Sunday in Phoenix, we called a family meeting, and my younger sister told me I was the burden and the house would be better without me while Mom studied a coaster and Dad watched the street like weather. I set my keys on the coffee table and walked out with my name still mine. That night, I pulled my card from every bill carrying it. 3 days later, an orange notice clung to our door. The HOA sent a courtesy notice. Nextdoor buzzed, and my phone filled with demands dressed as apologies. People will say this is revenge. It is not. It is the moment a boundary clicks into place after years of paying to be invisible. Come back with me to the living room in Arcadia Light, to the breath before the words that changed everything. The desert light slid through the sheer curtains and pooled on the coffee table where I set the vase. Peonies full and flushed. Lilies with quiet white faces. I tucked in eucalyptus because I wanted the room to smell like something living. Sunday in Arcadia Light carried a soft hush that floated in with the air, a sprinkler somewhere, a basketball thumping far down the block. Inside our living room, the quiet had edges. Mom sat at the end of the sofa with her hands on her knees. Linda always looked taller when she was anxious, as if good posture could hold a family together. Dad took the chair by the window and pretended the view of Indian School Road required study. Dale could look at nothing for a very long time when he did not want to look at a person. Kayla chose the arm of the love seat like a small stage. One leg crossed, heel tapping the cushion, phone bright on her knee. She glanced at the flowers without really seeing them, then looked straight at me. We were here for what Mom had called a family meeting. She had texted in the morning after church with her cheerful voice, said we should talk about household costs and who covers what and set clear boundaries so no one felt taken for granted. I arrived early and wiped a water ring off the table with the edge of my sleeve. My heart felt steady the way it used to before a ceremony when the bouquets were finished and the music had not started yet. Mom thanked me for the flowers and said they were lovely. She smiled at everyone as if we were guests at her patio brunch. Then she asked if we could review the bills one more time so all of us had the same picture. I kept my answer short. I said I had a simple list to keep us focused. Internet. The streaming bundles. A supplemental home policy I had carried while the roof was being repaired last fall. A few lingering subscriptions that stayed tied to my card when I moved back in. I said it made sense for the right person to be the account holder and that I was ready to transfer anything that lived under my name. Kayla made a sound that landed between a laugh and a sigh. She leaned back until her shoulders touched the wall and let her phone go dark. She said I always turned everything into a production. She said the house was tense because I collected receipts like a hobby and waved them around. I told her I was not waving anything. I said I was asking for alignment, not applause. I said I would hand things over, then I let the sentence sit there. Dad cleared his throat. The sound went into the curtain and disappeared. Mom asked Kayla if she wanted to share what bothered her. Kayla sat forward with her fingers, locked eyes bright and cold. She said the part that never gets said out loud. She told me I was a burden and that they wished I were gone. She watched my face like a person checks a mirror before leaving the house. The room felt different after that, like the pressure changed and the air grew thin. Mom whispered, "Kayla, please," and reached for a coaster and then moved it an inch and did nothing with it. Dad blinked 3 times and stared back at the street. I felt my body choose stillness the way a florist chooses a focal stem. Across the room, the air conditioner clicked on. Somewhere outside, a dog barked. I thought about how many blooms it would take to change the smell of this room from lemon cleaner and old dust to something like spring and decided no number would be enough. I told Kayla I heard her. I said I understood the sentence even if I did not agree with it. My voice stayed even because I wanted it that way. I thanked Mom for asking us to meet and said I would keep this simple. For years I had carried things under my name. It made emergencies easier and it made forgetting easier. Money is invisible until it is not. I said I was done arguing about what anyone thought of me. I was going to fix the part that was mine to fix. Kayla looked at the eucalyptus as if it had just appeared. She said I loved to play savior and then martyr when no one clapped. She said no one asked me to take anything on and I did it because I needed to feel important. She said her clients could not wait while I rearranged the world to suit myself. The words came fast and then slowed. Her breathing shifted when she ran out of steam. She pulled herself back into a pose that read calm. Mom rubbed the side of her neck. She asked if I would stay for dinner after we finished. She said she had roast chicken and salad and the bread was already sliced. I loved her for saying the word dinner as if the room were ordinary. That is what she does. She sets a table even when the plates are full of worry. Dad suggested we make a list, so no one got confused. He said it softly like a person who does not want to bump into furniture in the dark. I pictured the spreadsheet on my laptop with neat columns and dates like clean ribbons. I pictured my old shop on Central Avenue, the door chime, the smell of cold water and green stems. I remembered the day I handed the keys to a buyer with careful eyes and told myself it had been a choice, not a mistake. I told the room I would write everything down and send it tonight. I said I would remove my card from anything that did not belong to me. I said I would move the personal subscriptions to my new address as soon as I secured one. Kayla lifted her eyebrows as if daring me to declare it. She asked if I thought I was moving out. I said yes. It felt like placing a final flower where it belonged. Mom set the coaster down and picked it up again. She said maybe we were tired and should pause and remember that we love one another. She wanted a bridge and the river kept rising. I looked at her hands, the thin dryness over her knuckles from gardening without gloves. Kayla stood and drifted toward the kitchen doorway, then stopped and came back a little orbit to make me follow. I stayed where I was and then I stood because sitting felt like pretending. I told them there was no need to repeat themselves. I said I understood Kayla and I understood the silence and I understood my own threshold. I did not list the nights I called utility companies before dawn from the driveway so no one heard me spell our last name. I did not bring up the way the roof smelled after the first monsoon or how the house seemed to hold its breath when bills arrived. Those are my details. I keep them pressed flat like leaves inside a book that does not leave the shelf. Kayla said she had a client meeting in the morning and needed reliable service without drama. She said if I planned an announcement, it should not affect her schedule. She said I could do whatever I wanted as long as I did not make a scene. The smile she wore was bright and thin. Dad traced a scratch along the chair arm with his thumb. Mom asked if anyone wanted iced tea. The question hung and went unanswered. I reached into my pocket and felt the keys. Warm from my hand. The metal remembered other houses and doors in other cities and a younger version of me who thought rescuing and erasing were the same act. I set the keys on the coffee table beside the vase. The sound was small and clean. It was the only ceremony the room needed. I said I would stop paying for what lives under my name. I said I would send a list today so nothing would surprise anyone. I said I would move out tonight. I said I would be reachable by email for things that required clarity and that I would not negotiate feelings. I kept my tone smooth the way I seal the ends of ribbon so they do not fray. Mom inhaled as if to speak and then let the air go. Her eyes found mine and softened. Dad nodded at nothing, mouth a straight line, hands quiet. Kayla looked at her phone and the blue light washed her cheek and gave her a new mask to wear. I lifted the vase and slid a coaster under it so the condensation would not mark the table. I smoothed the runner with my palm. I let my eyes pass over the room one more time, the shelf with faded paperbacks, the framed school photos, the little dish that holds keys when people plan to return. The late afternoon sun stretched across the rug. A car door shut outside. A sprinkler hissed and ticked against the curb. I told them thank you for meeting. Then I turned toward the hallway to gather what was already mine. The flowers stayed on the table, making their quiet promise to breathe for a few more days. I carried the overnight bag into the hall and kept my breathing, even the way I do when a ribbon will not lie flat. The door to my old room opened on the smell of detergent and dust. I took the short list of things that were clearly mine. The camera I used to photograph bouquets. The laptop wrapped in a felt sleeve. A sweater with a snag at the cuff that only I would ever mend. I left the vase on the table. The flowers could work their quiet in a house that had run out of words. The sky over Phoenix was still streaked with pale gold when I backed the car out. The steering wheel was warm from the sun. I turned left toward Indian School and kept going until the streets widened and the sound of the house fell off of me. I drove to a roadside inn that looks after tired sales reps and travelers who missed their flights. The clerk slid a key card across the counter and told me to park near the stairwell. The room was clean and a little sad. 2 firm pillows, a fixed smile and a picture of saguaros, a hum from the air unit that did not quite cover the sound of someone wheeling ice down the hall. I set the laptop on the desk and sat on the edge of the bed with my palms on my knees until the first tremor of adrenaline was done. I knew what I had to look at next. It was not pretty, but it was mine. I opened the laptop and cleared the notifications and pulled up the folder that lives on my desktop. I called it Desert Bloom Archive on a day when I still believed I would reopen the shop under the same name. The first file in the folder is a scanned packet from June of 2019. The buyers and I stood at a narrow conference table downtown. We signed our names until the letters looked strange. $180,000. I remember the wire landing and the way relief felt like a thud, not like a song. I walked outside into a heat that had already learned my name and called Mom on the sidewalk. She cried and said she would bake a peach cobbler that weekend when we could all breathe again. I scrolled through the messages from that month. Subject lines like roof estimate and delinquent notice and Maricopa County Treasurer. Notes in Mom's voice that said your father is pretending he can fix the leak with a tarp and a prayer, and I cannot sleep when it rains. A list from Dad in his careful block letters of what he would repair himself and what he could not. I called SunWest Credit Union and listened to a recorded voice say your call matters. It mattered to me because the house mattered to me because the people inside it mattered to me even when they did not seem to know what to do with me. I sent payments that week like I was putting out small fires. The arrears on the mortgage. The property tax for the half year. A chunk to the roofing company so they would pull permits. I left the title office with a folder full of papers and a bruise of a headache and drove across town to meet a contractor under a blistering sky. I brought cold water because that is who I am. When the roofers began, I sat on the steps and answered calls from brides, and told them my shop was closing and I would refer them to someone good. I kept my voice bright while a man in a harness scraped away old shingles and revealed the secrets of our house to the sun. From July of 2019 through June of 2024, the rhythm was steady, the way a heart can be steady even when it is tired. Electric and water when they posted. Internet and 2 streaming bundles that Kayla needed for her design work and that Dad pretended not to watch late at night. A supplemental home policy I picked up when the roof repair began because the contractor advised an extra layer while the work was open. The numbers march across the spreadsheet I built on a Tuesday after dinner. Electric hovered around $280 in the hot months and sank a little in winter. Water averaged close to 90. Internet sat stubbornly near 75. The home insurance I carried came to just over $310. Property tax installments hit like a small thunder on the months they fell due, a little over $360 at a time. Repairs did not care about my calendar. The water heater in January. The garbage disposal in May. The apology flowers that I sometimes brought home for myself on a Thursday when no one noticed what I had done. I made a column that I called Ordinary Miracles. It showed how the light stayed on and the water ran and the router blinked its little blue eyelid because I typed numbers into forms and pressed submit. I did not put my name in that column because what I wanted was not credit. What I wanted was for the people I loved to stop living in fear of the next envelope. If fear were a plant, I would have found its root and pulled until it came up whole. It does not work that way. Fear loves shallow soil. It grows everywhere. Around the time the roof dried and the house stopped smelling like damp plywood, I moved back into my old room so I could be closer if the next leak came. I told myself it was for a season. Then seasons blurred. Mom started leaving little lists for me on the counter. Do we have to pay the HOA this week? Is the water on auto? Does the trash pickup charge extra for bulk? Dad said he would cash his checks from the lawnmower repairs on Friday and asked if I could float the electric until then. I said sure, and the sure became a small habit in my mouth. Kayla rolled her eyes when I asked about shared services and said I was obsessed with control. I tucked that sentence into a drawer and closed it. At the motel desk, I pulled up bank statements and started building a binder out of pixels. I could hear the ice machine again. I named the folder Boundary Plan Phoenix because I needed to say the plan out loud to myself. I dragged in PDF statements from the electric utility and the City of Phoenix Water Services and the internet provider. I downloaded confirmations for the policy with Sawara Mutual that I had carried while the roofers were on the ladder. I pulled 5 years of property tax receipts from the county portal and stacked them by date. I screenshotted transactions that tied to accounts where the login sits under my name. I wrote a note in the corner of the spreadsheet that read, "Remove card from all non-personal services." I wrote another that read, "The person who uses the service is the person who holds the account." My phone buzzed and went still. I did not pick it up. The room smelled like lemons and a memory of chlorine. I did the math I already knew but needed to see again. The average came to roughly $2,300 each month across 5 years. That does not include the pieces you cannot put in a cell. The early calls to a utility when the website locked up and the chatbot looped. The walk to the curb with a heavy can when Dad's back went out and Kayla had to finish a mock-up. The moments when Mom stood at the sink with wet hands and asked if we would ever feel normal again, and I said of course. Those are not numbers, those are the ways a person uses up her name without realizing it. I scrolled back to that day in June of 2019 again. The photo I took on the shop floor when the last inventory left the building. An empty wall where a shelf had held spools of ribbon. The way the polished concrete looked like lake water when the light hit it right. I remembered a bride who wanted peonies in August and how I explained that some flowers do not care about what we want. Seasons keep their own counsel. She chose garden roses and forgot her first wish by the time she walked down the aisle. There were other messages in the archive. The time Dad called and did not say hello before asking whether a second mortgage was a bad idea, and I said it was. The afternoon Mom texted a picture of her hand on the porch rail and the paint peeling like a scab and asked if we could do something about it before company came. The night Kayla sent a link to a job posting for a design role and asked if I thought she should apply, and I wrote back yes with 3 exclamation points and then deleted 2 of them because I did not want to look like a cheerleader. I selected all the files I had collected and exported a clean copy of the spreadsheet. I labeled it so there would never again be a debate about what I carried and what I did not. Boundary Plan Phoenix. Accounts and evidence. I wrote a short summary at the top in simple language that even a tired person could absorb. Here is what I have paid. Here is what sits under my name. Here is what will change. Here is how to transfer or open your own accounts. I wrote each provider with a phone number and hours because I know what it is to call at dinner time and reach no one. I added a note that said, "If you need help understanding a bill, I will explain it once." My stomach reminded me that I had skipped lunch. I walked to the vending machine and bought a bottle of water and a pack of crackers and ate them sitting on the carpet by the bed because I did not want to get crumbs in the sheets. A siren sang past on the road and faded. Somewhere a television laughed. When I finished, I emailed the binder to myself and saved a copy to an external drive I keep in my bag. I closed the laptop and rested both hands on the cover. The silence in the room felt less sharp. I thought about what Mom said earlier with her bright voice. We should remember that we love one another. I do remember. Love is why I sold a business I built with my own hands. Love is why I carried what I carried as if the weight would change the shape of a house and the habits of the people in it. Love will not help me if I do not also love myself. I wrote one more line at the bottom of the plan in a font large enough that no one could pretend they missed it. Effective immediately, I will end or remove my card from any service that belongs to me and only me. Services that belong to the household will be opened or transferred by the account holder who lives there. Questions may be sent by email. I will not receive them by phone. I folded my sweater and placed it on the dresser. I set my keys on the desk and looked at the metal edges catching the light. I let the air unit run and the hum filled the corners. Then I opened the laptop again and created a new checklist just for me. Internet and streaming to cancel. Supplemental policy to terminate. Passwords to reset. Evidence to print in the morning. I titled the document with a date so the next time anyone asks me when anything happened, I can point to a day on a calendar and not a feeling. The list waited on the screen like a clean counter before a floral order. I could see the work. I could see the sequence. I could see my way through. The list sat open while the motel air unit hummed steady and a new kind of quiet settled inside me. I shut the laptop, slid it into the felt sleeve, and packed the few things I had taken from the house. The parking lot was already warm. I drove east with the sun rising over the low roofs and the palms past bakeries opening their doors and joggers skirting the shade. Camelback Mountain lifted up in front of me like a familiar landmark that had waited without judgment. Mason answered my text at a red light and told me to come by. He and Sophie live in a stucco place not far from the trailhead, the kind of house that smells like coffee and oranges even before you step inside. He opened the door before I knocked and asked if I had eaten. I said a little and he said that would not do. Sophie came in from the patio with hair gathered in a clip and a dish towel thrown over one shoulder. She pressed a glass of water into my hand first and then a plate with toast and eggs that tasted like they came from a better morning. We did not drag the whole story into the room. Mason has a sense for when words help and when silence does more. He let the coffee drip and asked if I had a plan. I told him I had a document with accounts and a sequence. I told him there would be calls to make and forms to submit. He nodded and said the important part was that the plan was mine. He said he kept thinking about a man he knew in his landscaping days. Greg Dalton. Greg had paid for his grown kid's apartment and car and daycare and a few more things that crept in through the cracks. One day the kid said that Greg was in the way. Greg said he understood, and then he turned off every support that lived under his name. He did not slam doors. He moved to a smaller place near the river and answered calls when they were about weather and birthdays. Mason said the calm that came over Greg made him seem 10 years younger. I listened and felt the story settle next to my list. I could see the shape of a boundary that did not need to be loud to be real. Sophie took my plate and came back with her own mug and sat at the edge of the armchair like she was keeping watch. She asked what I needed from them today. I said a table and an outlet and a place where my decision could stand up straight. She pointed at the dining table where sunlight lay across the wood like a runner. I set up the laptop and opened my binder. The checklist waited with its squares ready for ink. Internet first. The account sat under my name. I logged into the provider portal and the page greeted me like always, as if nothing in the world had changed. I found the Manage Plan tab and the tiny link for cancel service. The calendar offered a disconnect date. I chose today. A pop-up asked if I was sure. I clicked confirm and a new screen thanked me for the years and explained that equipment could be returned by mail. I took a screenshot and saved the confirmation email to the folder. The cable modem in the living room at home would blink its last under someone else's silence. I felt the thought rise and then pass. That was not my room to manage anymore. Streaming bundles were next. They had been a convenience at first, a way to share logins when everyone camped in separate corners of the house during a hard winter. Later they became a tie I forgot I had. I moved through each service and found the pause or cancel buttons. The phrases were gentle. Are you sure? Maybe try a lower plan. We will miss you. I did not bargain with a website. I ended them and took screenshots and filed each email. It felt like trimming away ribbon that never matched the bouquet. The supplemental policy came after. Saguaro Mutual had been worth the extra cost while the roofers opened the skin of the house last fall. The roof is closed now. The gable sits tight against the sky. I opened the policy page and entered my cancellation request with the reason listed as work completed and no longer necessary. It asked for a date. I entered today. A notice appeared about any refund of unused premium. I took note and filed the message with the others. The folder on my desktop grew heavier in a way that made my shoulders feel lighter. Electric and water were different. Those accounts live under Linda and Dale. I opened the bank panel and removed my card from AutoPay where it had sat like a quiet backstop for years. I scrolled through the transfer templates and deleted the ones that sent money by habit. I felt a tug of muscle memory and let it go. The point of a boundary is not to starve anyone. The point is to return responsibility to the person who owns it. My phone buzzed against the tabletop. The screen lit with a text from Dale. A single line asking if the Wi-Fi had glitched and whether I could take a look because he needed to respond to a mower repair request that came in late. I held the phone and let the urge to fix roll through my hands and out my fingers. I typed a brief reply and then set it aside. I told him the account had been scheduled to disconnect under my name and that he could call the provider today to set up service under his. I added the phone number and hours and the note about an installation window. I did not add apology. I did not add explanation. I pressed send and turned the phone face down. Mason came by with more coffee and set it where I could reach. He asked if I wanted him to sit with me while I did the rest, or if I preferred to work alone. I said he could sit and read his paper and let his presence do the work that words could not. Sophie put a bowl of clementines at the corner of the table and told me to eat one whenever my jaw clenched. I smiled because she was right. I peel fruit when I am tense. The simple work of easing the skin away settles me. I went back to the binder and checked the squares. Internet done. Streaming done. Supplemental policy submitted. Bank auto-pays removed on the household accounts. I drafted a simple email to Linda and Kayla with the subject line that named the day so there would be no confusion. The message had 4 short parts. Here is a summary of services I ended that sit under my name. Here is a list of household providers with phone numbers to open new accounts in your own names. Here is what to expect in terms of timing. Here is how to reach me by email if you need the same information once. I attached the PDF and the screenshots and the spreadsheet with totals. I read it once for tone and once for clarity, and then I saved it in drafts. I wanted one more piece in place first. The last item on my list reads passwords to reset. It is not punishment. It is the equivalent of locking the flower cooler at night, so inventory does not wilt. I reset the passwords that guard my banking and my email and my cloud storage. I logged out of shared family consoles. I removed my profile from the living room television app list. Each small action closed a door that had been left open for too long. Another text arrived from Dale while I worked. He said he would call the provider and asked if I had a preference for speed. I wrote back that the basic plan is fine for email and that the higher tier helps with streaming and heavy uploads. I said the person paying should decide what they needed. He sent a short thanks. My phone went still. Late morning leaned over the backyard wall and brightened the tile. Mason rustled his paper and said that the trees needed water. He left and the hose hissed somewhere outside. Sophie asked from the kitchen if I liked tuna or turkey and I said, surprise me. She surprised me with turkey and avocado on toast and a handful of chips in a blue bowl. I ate and kept moving down the list because momentum is a friend in these moments. I opened my calendar and blocked a window tomorrow morning to print and sort a physical copy of the binder. Courts and contractors and confused relatives respect paper. I titled the appointment with words that would steady me if I woke up unsure. Evidence and clarity. I looked at the squares left and realized the work for today was nearly done. I went back to the first item on the list to be certain. I reopened the internet provider page to confirm the disconnect order had gone through. The screen showed a date and a request number. I took one more screenshot and saved it with a file name that began with the year and month, so it would sit in order no matter what system tried to jumble it. I sat back and let my spine relax. The room felt different, as if someone opened a window and let out stale air. I thought about how heavy a bouquet can feel to a bride until I tell her to drop her elbows and let the stems rest in the crook of her hand. The weight does not change. Her hold does. That is what this morning had been. The same house. The same bills. A different hold. Mason returned with damp cuffs and a grin that said the lemon tree would live another year. He glanced at the laptop and asked if I found the bottom of it. I told him I could see it now. He told me that was the thing with holes. They are only endless if you keep digging. Sophie cleared our plates and said I had earned a half hour of not looking at a screen. She suggested a short walk to the end of the block where bougainvillea ran wild along a wall. I wanted to take that walk. First, I wanted to close the circle. I clicked the final confirm on the last service that belonged to me. The page spun and then settled on a statement that the change was complete. I pressed the keyboard for a screenshot and watched the file slide into the folder. I refreshed my inbox until the confirmation email arrived and dragged it where it belonged. Then I closed the laptop and laid my palm on the cover as if it were a beating thing that needed calming. The weight between my shoulders shifted. It was not dramatic. It was the difference between carrying a pack up a grade and setting it down on a flat patch of earth. I stood and the air felt a shade lighter. Outside the mountain kept its shape and inside I felt a shape return to mine. Morning filled the guest room with a white square of light and the smell of coffee drifted in from the kitchen. I lay still long enough to hear a dove on the wall and the click of Sophie opening cabinets. Then my phone started buzzing across the nightstand like a trapped bee. The first call flashed Kayla. I let it ring once to steady my breath and answered. Her voice was already running. She said the connection was spotty, and she had a deliverable for Sonoran Threads at noon and I needed to put the internet back the way it was. I told her the account under my name was scheduled to end and that the person who lives there should open a new account in their own name. I said I could text the provider number and the hours. She said I was trying to ruin her work and that real family does not pull power moves. I repeated the boundary slow and even the way I cut stems underwater so they do not panic. I said I would not turn anything back on. She hung up without goodbye. The screen lit again before it went dark. I set the phone face down and sat up. Mom called next. Linda always starts with a softer tone like she thinks kindness can coax the world back into place. She said a past due notice had come through on the mortgage portal and that she felt sick. She asked if I could help just until the weekend. I told her I would not transfer money anymore and that notices arrive because accounts are not current, not because I changed a password. I said I could text a simple summary to avoid confusion and that I would include phone numbers and steps. Her breath went thin and then she said she did not recognize this version of me. I said this version of me had been here the whole time and now she was speaking. The house smelled like toast when I walked into the kitchen. Mason poured coffee and slid a mug across the counter. He asked if the morning had started loud. I told him it had. He asked if I wanted to sit outside for 5 minutes before I turned the laptop on. I did. The mountain looked like a postcard from a place where people did not make each other small. Sophie set a bowl of berries between us. She said 5 minutes is not a cure, but it changes how the next 5 minutes feel. She was right. Back at the dining table, I opened the binder and began the audit I had promised myself. I checked confirmations for the internet disconnect and the streaming cancellations. I pulled up the Saguaro Mutual portal and saw the pending status for the supplemental policy, a neat little line that would settle out by end of day. I was about to close the tab when a banking alert popped on my screen. A small charge not large enough to scare me, but wrong in the way a wrong note can wreck a song. I clicked through to details. A design app I had set up years ago for a client proofing session, the kind of service that charges per seat. The payment method listed the last 4 digits of my card. I sat very still. I remembered Kayla asking to try the app once for a mock-up when her own trial had expired. I had handed over my laptop for one afternoon and never thought about it again. The billing portal showed an active seat with a user email that was not mine. The most recent login had been last night. A little heat rose up my neck and then cooled. I do not need anger to do a clean task. I opened my password manager and reset my credentials for the app. I logged in, removed my card from the payment page, revoked the extra seat, and changed the main account email back to mine. The site sent me 3 messages in quick succession. Your password has been updated. Your payment method has been removed. Your team license has changed. I screenshotted each one and slid them into the evidence folder. My phone lit again with Kayla. I did not answer. I typed a text instead. I wrote that the design app she had been using was tied to my payment card and that I had removed it. I wrote that she would need to open her own account if she wanted to continue her work. I included the link to the sign-up page and the note that she would likely qualify for a discounted plan as a freelancer if she asked customer service. I did not add any sentence about boundaries. The facts were enough. I needed clarity on the line between ending support and doing harm. I looked up the number for Ortiz and Rowe and asked for a short consult with Rachel Ortiz. The receptionist put me into a late morning slot. Rachel called right on time. Her voice was calm and sounded like it belonged to someone who keeps neat stacks. She asked who held which accounts. I told her. She asked what actions I had taken. I told her I had ended services in my own name and removed auto-pays for accounts in my parents' names and revoked a single software seat that billed to my card. She asked if I had touched physical equipment or interfered with any service within the home. I said no. She said what I had done sounded lawful and measured. She reminded me not to touch property that is not mine and not to represent myself as an account holder when I am not. Document everything she said because tired people forget they heard the plan. I asked about no contact when calls turn accusatory. Rachel said I could set conditions for contact, for example email only and only about logistics. She suggested a simple script. I can respond to clear questions about accounts I controlled. I cannot engage on how you feel about my choice. She said that if it escalated, I could tell them to stop contacting me by phone and use email. If they ignored that, I could consider a stronger step, but she thought clarity might be enough. She asked if I had a safe place to stay, and I told her about Mason and Sophie and the spare room with the white quilt. She said safety includes bank logins and 2-factor codes, and those were already secured. She asked if there was anything else. I thanked her for giving me a fence line I could see. After the call, I made a few tidy notes and filed them under legal in the binder. Then I drafted the message to Mom I had promised. I kept it short and clear enough that a person could read it with a headache and still get the point. I wrote that effective today I had ended the internet and streaming accounts that exist under my name. I wrote that I had submitted cancellation of the supplemental home policy and that any refund would be handled by the insurer. I wrote that I had removed my card from autopay on the electric and water because those accounts are not in my name. I wrote that the person who lives there and owns the account should open or transfer service with the providers. I listed each provider with the customer number and the hours. I wrote that I would answer a single email if help was needed understanding a bill, and that I would not discuss feelings by phone. I read the message aloud to hear where it shook. My voice faltered on the word feelings. I steadied it. I added one last line that said, I will not respond to calls from Kayla today. Then I hit send and watched the little blue bar cross the screen. Immediately the phone lit with Kayla again. I changed the setting that silences calls from a chosen contact. The phone gave a gentle vibrate of acknowledgement and then rested. My hands rested too. Sophie peeked around the doorway and asked if I wanted to walk to the corner for lemonade. I told her I would catch up in a minute. I opened the inbox and saw the confirmations stacking like small white tiles. Internet scheduled for disconnect. Streaming plans ended. Software license changed. I filed each one in its place. I closed the binder and set the laptop aside. Outside the street had settled into noon. Heat pushed up from the pavement and a hawk rode a wide circle above the cul-de-sac. I watched a neighbor lift a toddler into a car seat and kiss her small hand. The ordinary life of other people soothed me like cool water on a wrist. When I went back in, Mason had cut lemons and sugar laid out and a handful of mint in a jar. He said we can make our own and told me to stir. I stirred and the sugar dissolved into something bright. My phone stayed quiet on the counter. The day had turned a corner I could not see from the house where I used to live. By noon, the heat pressed against the windows like a steady hand, and the lemonade pitcher left a ring on the wood. I rinsed the coaster, set it back under the glass, and checked my inbox. A new subject line sat there from Linda. It was a photo taken too close, the kind of picture people make when they are frightened and their hands forget how to aim. Orange paper taped to the front door. The internet provider logo near the top. A block of text that reads "Service termination scheduled." In the corner of the frame, I could see the shadow of our bougainvillea and a sliver of the doormat that says "Welcome" in faded script. Another message followed. Linda wrote that a letter from SunWest had arrived in the mailbox. She sent a second photo. The envelope lay on the hall table next to the ceramic bowl where we keep keys we pretend we will not lose. Past due reminder printed through the window. She added a line that said she felt sick and that maybe this had gone far enough. I read it twice and answered with the same steady words I had written the day before. Accounts in my name have been ended. Accounts in your names must be handled by the people who own them. Here are the phone numbers again. Here are the steps. I pressed send and kept my eyes on the screen until the little paper airplane disappeared. My phone buzzed with a text from Mason. He had been skimming next door while a batch of bread cooled on the counter. He wrote that a post had popped up about a house on our street, with a notice on the door. He sent a screenshot. The photo had been taken from across the street, at an angle pretending to be casual. The caption said, "Anyone know what is going on with the place on North 66th?" and then a handful of vague concern emojis that people use when they want to look kind while they prod a bruise. Comments stacked under it. Some offered prayers in the way the internet offers them, thin and quick. Some guessed at reasons. Two names jumped out of the stream. Jim and Patricia Langley. They lived directly opposite for more years than I can count. Jim said he had seen utility trucks the week before and wondered if there was an outage. Patricia wrote that she hoped everyone inside was all right and that times were tough for many. Her tone held sugar and a little acid the way store lemonade does. I felt the old pull to correct the record. To pin a neat explanation to a corkboard so that strangers would stop writing their own. I watched that urge rise and fall. I told myself what I had told myself last night. Public opinion is not a court. I do not owe a statement to a cul-de-sac. I saved the screenshot to the binder and closed the app. The HOA email arrived just after. Subject line: courtesy notice. Marla Pierce wrote in her crisp way that Camelback Vista had observed yard maintenance concerns and that bins left in view beyond pickup hours were a violation. She attached a photo of the front lawn with a slant of shadow across it and a thin crop of weeds near the walkway. She listed the rule number and the date she had driven by. The tone was businesslike, not cruel. I forwarded the email to Linda with a note that reads, "Please contact the HOA directly, as I am no longer the point of contact." I added the phone number and the fine schedule because I know how these letters escalate. Kayla did not write. She did not have to. Her silence filled the space between messages like steam. The house in my head tried on her voice anyway. She would say that I had embarrassed us and that neighbors were watching and that she had told me not to make a scene. I set the phone down and looked at my hands until the ghost of her voice faded. Sophie came in from the backyard with a basket of towels she had taken off the line. She asked if I had eaten lunch. I said not yet, and she offered me a bowl of pasta salad she had made the night before. Shells, cherry, tomatoes, basil, a little feta. I ate at the counter while she moved through the kitchen with an ease that made me remember what it felt like to trust a room. The doorbell rang and Mason let in a delivery guy with a stack of boxes for the store. A gust of heat came and went. The kitchen held. After lunch, I opened the binder again. I made a new tab labeled Day 3 and typed a simple timeline. Morning. Notice from internet provider on the door. Midday, HOA, courtesy notice. Mail. SunWest past due reminder arrived. Online. Next door post with photo. I pasted the images into place so that later when someone asked me how it happened I could point to a sequence instead of my memory. I wrote one line under the list. Silence is not consent, it is a boundary. My phone buzzed again. Mason had another screenshot. The thread on Nextdoor had continued. A user with a cactus avatar wrote that people should mind their own business. Someone else wrote that if a house falls into disrepair, it affects property values, which is everybody's business. Jim added that the family has always kept the place neat and that perhaps this was a hiccup. Patricia posted a picture of her bougainvillea and said that weeds come up even after a good rain. It felt like she was saying something and not saying it, which is her gift. Mason texted that he could flag the post if I wanted. I told him no. He asked if I needed to get out for a walk. I answered yes. We went out through the side gate and onto a street that curves toward a line of oleanders. The sun sat high and white. The sidewalks threw backlight. I kept to the sliver of shade where palms and cypress make little islands. My shoulders relaxed as my feet found the rhythm. Mason knows how to walk with someone who does not want to talk. He kept the pace easy and let the silence do the work. At the corner, a jacaranda had dropped purple confetti on the concrete. I stepped through it and felt the lift that flowers always give me even when they are stubbornly not mine. Halfway around the block, my phone buzzed again. Linda had forwarded the HOA email a second time, this time with a question about whether the fine would apply if she pulled the bins in by sunset. I wrote back that Marla usually gives a grace period for first notices and that she should reply directly to confirm. I wrote that yard maintenance can be hired by the hour if needed and that payment arrangements are between her and the vendor. I paused before I sent it. Old me would have called a landscaper and paid the invoice up front. I let the pause hold. Then I sent the message exactly as it was. At the next corner, a man in a wide hat watered citrus trees. He lifted his hand in a polite half wave. The water arced and made dark freckles on the dirt. I breathed in and tasted the mineral clean smell of hose water, the same all over the city. Mason pointed at the mountain and said the trail would be baking by now. I said I was happy to keep to the flats. He said flat is a gift when you have been climbing. By the time we circled back, the kitchen had cooled and the pitcher of lemonade wore a fresh ring. I put a new coaster under it and wiped the counter dry. I checked my inbox. A message from Marla sat there addressed to Linda with me copied. She acknowledged the reply and said thank you for the update and that the courtesy notice would be marked as addressed once the bins were stored and the weeds were handled. She added a line about understanding that summer heat makes yard work difficult and encouraged scheduling earlier in the day. I appreciated that she had chosen a practical note over a scold. I filed the email and closed the tab. The SunWest reminder took longer to answer because it was not mine to answer. I did nothing with it. Instead, I returned to the Day 3 tab and wrote a sentence that read, "Mortgage reminder, arrived by mail to the homeowners." I felt a prick of helplessness, and then I named it and watched it shrink. Some work is not mine. That does not make me cruel. It makes me honest. Late afternoon slid over the tiles and the house made that soft settling sound that good homes make as the heat moves out. I poured a small glass of lemonade and carried it to the table with my laptop. I reviewed the folder and double-checked that each screenshot from today had the date visible. I added a brief note to each caption so that if I looked at this in a month, I would not rely on what I thought I remembered. Picture of door tag taken by Linda. Nextdoor post captured by Mason at 12:41. HOA courtesy notice at 11:07. I saved and backed up the file to the external drive. The quiet inside me felt fragile and real, like a new petal. I did not want to bruise it by scrolling through strangers again. I told myself one more time that neighbors can say whatever they want into their phones. The only thing I need to carry is my own name and the facts that belong to it. I stood up. A breeze moved through the hallway, barely there, just enough to lift the edge of a curtain and lay it down again. I put my shoes back on and told Mason I was going to loop the block once more. He nodded and said he would start dinner and that Sophie would join me in a minute. I stepped outside. The light had softened to the color of peaches. The sidewalk held a day's worth of stories in dusty footprints and bicycle lines. I followed the curve of the street and let the ordinary pull me forward. The next week unrolled like a tight tape measure, small clicks you do not notice until you see how far it reaches. Monday started with a message from Kayla that did not arrive in my phone but arrived through other people. Mason came in from the shop with flour on his sleeve and said he had seen her name on a thread that a friend in design had reshared. Deadline missed a client asking if anyone could take over a rush project. I opened my laptop and saw a short post from Sonoran Threads looking for a replacement for a seasonal capsule. The timing lined up with the noon delivery she had promised. I closed the tab and kept my hands off the keys. By afternoon, an email from Leo Park found its way into my inbox because he had my address from a wedding project years ago. He wrote politely that he hoped I was well and asked if I knew any freelance designers who could pick up a half-finished lookbook. He said his team had been unable to reach their current contractor on time and that he needed clean files by Friday. I read the lines 3 times, then wrote back that I no longer work in that lane and wished him luck with the search. I did not say anything about my family. I did not point anyone toward anyone. The world is small and has a way of learning what it needs to know. Tuesday morning, Sienna Harper sent a brief note to a list that included Kayla's business address and a few others. She reminded her team about deliverables and client expectations in the coming quarter. The lines looked like a general reminder, but the last sentence had the weight of a private warning. I know the feel of a boss trying to steady a ship that wants to list. A few hours later, a friend who stocks shelves at a Tempe market texted Sophie that a new hire would start on nights. The city is wide, but gossip moves like heat. It finds you even when you are not looking for it. Midweek, the sky turned heavy at the edges and the air put its hands on your shoulders. The monsoon arrived the way it does, in a rush that felt like applause and then a roar. Mason pulled patio cushions inside and Sophie ran towels to the door. I watched the water beat the driveway into a mirror and felt my stomach tighten with a memory I did not invite. An hour later, my phone chimed. Linda had texted a photo of the living room ceiling near the vent. A small bloom of water had spread into the paint like a bruise. She wrote that the bucket was out and asked if I still had the roofer's number. My first instinct reached for the file before I remembered the line I had drawn. I answered that the main policy sits in her name and that she should call the carrier to start a claim. I added the number and the reminder that an adjuster visit is usually required. I told her the storm would have slowed other crews and that patience would be necessary. She replied that she would call right now and then wrote that she wished this was not complicated. I did not answer that part. The storm moved on, shouldered by a late sun that turned wet asphalt into glass. The house would be hot and a little sour from the damp. I could smell it just imagining the hallway. I shook the picture loose and sat with Sophie at the table while she looked up recipes for something cold that did not need the oven. When the room grew quiet again, another email blinked across my screen. Camelback Vista HOA had escalated from courtesy to fine. The subject line named the lot and the account number. The body stated weeds along the front walk, bins visible past allowed time, and a missed yard maintenance cycle after a previous notice. The fine was small, the sort of fee that looks symbolic until the next letter doubles it. I forwarded the email to Linda with the link for payment and a note that said she could also request a hearing if she believed there was an error. I did not add any sentence about how easy it would be to pull 2 weeds and push a bin because living inside someone else's mess has a way of making simple things feel impossible. The claim adjuster timeline landed the next morning. Linda called the insurer and then called me. She said the earliest appointment was next week and that the policy deductible would apply. I could hear her weighing the number before she said it. It was not ruinous, but it was enough to make a person with a thinning account wonder if a bucket might be cheaper. I told her again that decisions about repairs sit with the homeowner and that the insurer could advise about damage and coverage. She said her head hurt and that the storm came at a bad time. Storms usually do. Dale sent a short text midday asking if I had suggestions for getting job requests without home Wi-Fi. He wrote that a neighbor mentioned a library has computers. I wrote back that libraries do and that the branch on 44th Street keeps longer hours on weekdays. I added that a phone hotspot might be enough for email if he wanted to upgrade his plan temporarily. I did not offer to drive or to sit in the parking lot while he drafted messages. He can ask me for information. He cannot ask me to keep being the net. By Friday, the fine clock ticked again. The second HOA notice included a photo of the same weeds and a line about penalties if the matter remained unresolved beyond the next week. Patricia posted on Nextdoor about a community cleanup morning, and the comments thanked her initiative. Jim wrote that he could lend a trimmer if anyone needed. I did not volunteer our address. I did not ask strangers to cross a line Linda and Dale have not asked me to cross. I saved the screen and closed the thread. The house at Mason and Sophie's felt like an island with shade. We ate salads and fruit and laughed at a video of a kitten that a niece had sent. Normal life threaded through the days like soft string, and I let it hold me. If I looked toward Arcadia, a muscle in my jaw went tight, so I looked at the mountain instead and practiced the discipline of not touching trouble that does not belong to me. Saturday afternoon, the sky cleared to a hard blue and cicadas sang from the palms like rattles. I answered email about the workshop I was planning and ordered ribbon in 3 neutral tones. Midway through a draft, there was a knock at the door. Sophie opened it and turned to me. Linda stood on the porch with a canvas tote and a face that said she had eaten little and slept less. Sophie offered water and moved into the kitchen with a kind of kindness that gives privacy. Linda came into the living room and sat on the edge of the sofa with her tote at her feet. She said the adjuster could not come until Wednesday, and she was worried the ceiling would bubble more. She said the HOA had issued a fine, and she did not see how yard work would happen with Kayla working nights and Dale chasing repairs that never seemed to land. She said she had looked at the mortgage portal and closed it again because the numbers made her heart race. She told me she had drafted a change to her will on a notepad. She said if I could help this one last time, not forever, only enough to steady the house, she would adjust the will so that things felt fair after. She looked at the door like she expected the past to walk in with lemonade and save us from the future. I listened the way you listen to rain when you cannot stop it. I kept my hands still on my knees so that they would not try to fix the air between us. I told her I heard she was scared. I told her I believed the timing felt cruel. I told her that inheritance is not a currency for present help, and that love cannot be negotiated like a service plan. I said if she wanted to change her will, she should do it with a lawyer because people think clearer in offices with clocks. I said I was not the person to make this easier by doing the same thing I had always done. She rubbed at a thread on the tote strap and it frayed a little. She said she did not recognize me lately. I told her this was the only version of me that makes it to the end of the story. She asked if I could at least call the insurer for her because sometimes the words get stuck. I said I would write her a short script and a list of questions so she could ask them herself. I wrote it while she watched. I kept the sentences small. I am the homeowner. I need to confirm deductible and coverage for storm damage. I would like the soonest available adjuster. Please email me the claim number. She folded the paper and slid it into her tote like it might melt if she waited too long. She stood and then sat again. She said Kayla had picked up a night shift at the grocery in Tempe and came home so tired she looked washed out. She said Dale had driven to the library and fumbled the computer mouse like a man who had spent his life with wrenches. She said they were trying. I said trying is a beginning. I did not move. She asked finally if I was sure I could not float 2 bills just to stop the bleeding. I told her no. My voice stayed even the way you keep your hands even when you strip thorns from a stem. She looked at me for a long moment the way a person examines a closed door not because they plan to break it but because they are trying to remember what the key looks like. When she left, the light had shifted to late day and the trees threw long shadows across the sidewalk. Sophie came back into the room and put a hand on my shoulder. She did not ask what had been said. She did not need to. I stood and walked to the sink and ran water over my wrists until my skin cooled. The room settled around the two of us like a soft towel. The storm had moved through, but the air still felt charged. I went back to the table and opened the binder. I added a new line under the Week 2 tab. Adjuster scheduled. Deductible discussed. HOA fine issued. Kayla night shift began. Library suggested for internet access. Mother visited and requested conditional help. Boundary maintained. I saved the file and closed the laptop. Outside crickets started up in the hedges and a child on a scooter made a loop in the cul-de-sac before a parent called him in. I stood at the window for a long breath and let the ordinariness of other lives do what it could. Then I turned toward the kitchen to help Sophie lay plates on the table. Sunday morning opened like a clean page. I sat at Mason and Sophie's dining table with coffee and my laptop and pulled up the draft I had promised Mom. The words had the calm that comes after you practice them out loud. I added the attachment with the accounts and the steps and the phone numbers. At the top, I wrote that Rachel Ortiz had reviewed the language for clarity and that the goal was to make sure the person who uses a service is the person who opens and pays for it. I read it once for tone and once for facts, then I pressed send to Linda with Kayla copied. I watched the blue bar crawl across the screen and then disappear. I sent a second message to Linda only. It held a short checklist in plain words for the week. Call insurer to confirm adjuster appointment and claim number. Store bins out of sight by pickup day. Hire yard help if needed for the weeds along the walkway. Open internet in your name so that work and appointments can go forward. If you need to know who to call, refer to page 1 of the attachment. I kept my voice steady in the text the way I keep scissors steady near a tender stem. By midday, Dale sent a string of short texts. He said he had borrowed a few hundred from an old coworker named Ray to get the truck running and replace a belt that had shredded itself. He said he had put his name up on the library bulletin board for small engine work and asked if I thought anyone still read those cards. I said library boards still make work happen and that he should add a phone number with clear hours. He thanked me and wrote that the computer lab felt like another planet but the staff had been kind. I told him kindness is a bridge and to walk over it as far as it would take him. Nextdoor found me without my permission by way of a text from Mason. He said there was a new post from Marla Pierce and that it sounded like a person putting a lid on a pot before it boiled over. He sent a screenshot. Marla had explained in clean sentences how HOA notices work. First a courtesy, then a fine if unaddressed, then escalating penalties. She wrote that the goal was tidy yards and safe streets, not public shaming, and that photos of private homes would be removed if posted without context. She encouraged residents to bring concerns to the office rather than to a forum. The comments under her note shifted. The tone moved from prodding to quiet. Jim wrote that he appreciated the clarity. Patricia added a small heart reaction and nothing else. Mason texted that the temperature in there had dropped by 10 degrees. I smiled at the phrase and saved the screenshot to my binder. Kayla chose a different stage. Late that afternoon, she posted on her design account about being undermined by a person who should be family. She did not use my name, but she called the person older and controlling and said her work had been sabotaged at a critical moment. Friends circled fast with sad faces and encouragement that sounded like smoke. A few asked who did this. A few told her to stay strong. I recognized 2 of the names from a networking event where I once poured lemonade and passed out business cards. The air in my chest burned for a moment and then cooled. I did not write back. I did not message anyone. I tapped the menu and selected mute. I do not have to drink from every cup someone hands me. By evening, the same post had a new comment. A simple note from a professional account for Sonoran Threads that said the recent contract had been canceled for late delivery. No names, no argument, just a date and a fact. The thread went quiet. I pictured Leo crafting the sentence like a seam on a garment, straight and strong so it would not split in the wash. I saved a record of the post and then I closed the app. The night poured into the house like warm water and I let my shoulders sink. Monday slipped into Tuesday with small, sure steps. I wrote to Linda in the morning to ask whether the adjuster appointment had a confirmed time. She said Wednesday afternoon and that she had set out extra towels just in case. She said the deductible number still made her stomach hurt. I told her she could ask the adjuster what repairs could be done in stages to spread the cost. She sent a thumbs up and a prayer hand, the 2 things she uses when she wants to say she is trying. I set the phone down and folded laundry with Sophie while she told me about a neighbor who rescues cats, and the domestic work steadied my head. Later that day, I drafted the email I had been avoiding. It needed to go to everyone at once, and it needed to leave no room for revision by committee. I opened a new message and addressed it to Linda and Dale and Kayla with a blind copy to myself for the record. I attached the spreadsheet with 5 years of totals. I attached the screenshots from the cancellations and the list of providers with numbers and hours. The body of the email was short enough to fit on one phone screen. I wrote that effective immediately, I would not be a backup method of payment or a failsafe for any household account. I wrote that I would respond one time to clear questions about an account that sat under my name and only by email. I wrote that I would not respond to messages sent late at night or to messages that asked me to discuss feelings. I wrote that I hoped each of them would take care of what belonged to them and that I would take care of what belongs to me. I read it once for spine and once for kindness. Then I pressed send and watched the blue bar march forward. Miniature relief moved through my shoulders like when a bouquet finally locks into balance and the stems hold each other up. Tuesday night, I lay awake longer than I wanted to and counted the ceiling lines. When I finally slept, I dreamed of ribbon miles of it looping around a house and falling away clean when I cut it with a single smooth stroke. In the morning, I boiled eggs and ate them with salt and pepper at the kitchen counter, while Mason packed deliveries and Sophie mapped out social posts for the week. We talked about little things on purpose. The best time to plant zinnias. Whether the bakery should try lemon bars again in this heat. The way the sky bruises purple before a storm. Midweek brought the first class. It was small by design because small felt safe. Citrus Grove Nursery had offered a corner near the potting benches early in the day before customers crowded the aisles. I set out buckets with cool water and leafy stems, a line of garden roses, a few stems of eucalyptus, and a handful of lisianthus that made me think of silk. Sophie helped arrange the folding chairs and taped a handwritten sign to a chalkboard. Hand-tied bouquet basics with Nora. 6 names appeared on my list, and then 6 people walked in on time with open faces. 2 were brides. 1 was a woman celebrating a divorce with something alive on her table. 1 had a toddler in a stroller who watched me like I was a magician. I started with the way I always start. The vase is a home. Think of your stems as roommates. Everyone needs space and water and light. Your hands are the landlord and the welcome mat. I moved slow and invited them to move slower. I showed them how to turn the bouquet in their hands, instead of twisting their wrists. I told them to breathe in the green smell between steps. We laughed when one rose misbehaved and leaned too far, and I trimmed it back, and everyone sighed when the bouquet found its center. A cicada sang somewhere beyond the greenhouse glass, and a fan pushed the air around our ankles. During the break, one of the brides told me she had followed my old shop on Central Avenue and that she had been sorry when it closed. She said it looked like a place where you could walk in with a need and walk out with a story in your hands. I said that was always the goal. She asked if I still took wedding clients. I told her I did consulting and small design and that I knew people for the big heavy lifts. She smiled as if she had stepped from sun into shade. I felt a small click inside my chest, the kind that says, a piece has found its slot. Class ended with 6 bouquets tied with twine and ribbon and a table washed down and put back in order. I tucked leftover stems into a jar and wrote a thank you on the chalkboard with a dusty finger. People hugged me with that particular gratitude reserved for moments when hands have learned something at the same time as hearts. I loaded the car with buckets and clippers and a folded sign. The nursery manager handed me a small envelope with the workshop fee and a receipt. The paper felt crisp and ordinary in the way money should feel when it is cleanly earned. Back at Mason and Sophie's, the kitchen smelled like cut fruit and cool water. I set the envelope on the counter and washed my hands to the wrists. My phone sat where I had left it. 2 messages from Linda waited. One said the adjuster would come at 3 tomorrow. The other was a photo of the bins tucked away and the weeds pulled the walkway, looking like a promise kept. I wrote back, good job, and left it simple. There were no messages from Kayla. That absence felt better than the noise. Evening arrived on quiet feet. Sophie asked about the class and I told her the toddler had clapped when a bouquet came together. Mason poured iced tea and held up his glass. We did not toast, we just drank. The day had been full enough without ceremony. I went to the dining table and opened the binder. I added a new entry to the Week 3 tab. Boundary summary emailed. Dale borrowed to repair truck posted library card. HOA process posted by Marla speculation cooled. Kayla posted vague accusation friends softened after client note about late delivery. Global email sent backup role ended. First workshop taught 6 attendees corner table near the potting bench all bouquets held. I closed the binder and sat back. The house breathed like a live thing around me. In the yard, a wind chime made a small sound and then went still. I let the quiet settle and stayed there until I could feel my own name steady in my chest. Saturday came with a clean sun and the kind of breeze that makes banners tremble. Sophie and I loaded buckets into her hatchback and drove to Citrus Grove Nursery while the aisles were still quiet. The air smelled like damp soil and tomatoes. We carried in folding tables and the chalkboard I had scrubbed clean the night before. Desert Bloom Studio in careful handwriting. Hand-tied bouquet basics. We clipped craft paper to the tables and set out clippers, twine, and ribbon in a small row that looked like a promise kept. Sophie had that happy focus she gets when a plan clicks. She checked the roster on her phone and smiled at the word full. 6 names for the morning session and 6 for the afternoon. She said we could move 2 from the waitlist if anyone canceled. No one did. I filled buckets with cool water and tucked in eucalyptus spray roses, lisianthus, and 3 stems of garden roses for each person because everyone should feel the heft of something generous in their hands. I added a few stems of ruscus and a handful of lemon leaf from the back lot. The green smell rose like a prayer and settled under the shade cloth. The first group arrived in a cluster of soft voices and careful steps. 2 brides from Scottsdale with notebooks and hopeful faces. A woman who said she had been watching flower videos late at night to calm her mind. A teacher with summer still under her skin. A young stylist who loved color. A woman close to my mother's age who said she wanted something alive at her table and did not want to wait for an occasion to be told she could have it. I asked names and used them often. People stand up taller when you set their names in the air and hand them back. I began the way I always do when I feel the urge to rush. I told them that a vase is a small home and that stems are roommates. Each one needs space and water and a little air. Your hand is the landlord and the welcome mat. You do not cram anyone into a corner. You turn the bouquet in your hand and let each voice find a place. The words came smooth because I had spoken them to myself all week. Boundaries sound better when you put them into a craft and let them be taught by touch. We trimmed stems at a diagonal and stripped leaves below the waterline. I showed them how to start with a triangle of green to make a base. I asked them to breathe with their hands in when they lifted a rose out, when they tucked in a sprig. We turned our bouquets a quarter turn and again until it felt like a dance instead of a task. The stylist placed 2 roses too close and I asked the group what they saw. Someone said those 2 are elbowing each other. We laughed, and I pulled one out and set it a finger's width away, and everyone made that soft sound people make when a picture clicks into focus. One of the brides asked about color and how to hold herself to a palette when she loved everything. I said love is not the problem. Abundance without form is the problem. I told her to choose 1 lead, 1 support, and 1 surprise. I held up a blush rose as lead, a pale lisianthus as support, and a stem of something wild as the surprise. She nodded and the teacher wrote it down and underlined surprise twice. The woman close to my mother's age kept glancing at her bouquet like it might get away from her. I asked her what it wanted to do. She said it wanted to sit lightly and look back at her without apology. We worked toward that look together. In the break, I refilled buckets and Sophie passed around cold water. A woman approached me at the corner of the table and said she used to follow my old shop on Central. She remembered the golden light in the window in late afternoon and the way I set roses in a row by stem length. She said she was sorry when it closed and asked if I took weddings on a limited basis. I told her I did consulting and smaller weddings, and that for very large installations, I partnered with teams who love ladders and long nights. She smiled and said her sister was planning a winter wedding near the canal and needed someone who could listen more than she talked. She took my card and promised to email. Class ended with 6 bouquets tied with twine and ribbon. The room looked like a small garden had been persuaded to behave. We took photos by the potting bench, and I watched people hold their arrangements at a height that made their shoulders drop. Some of them wiped at their eyes and laughed. It happens when hands teach the heart something it did not know it knew. The nursery manager signed my fee sheet with a quick flourish and slipped an envelope into my palm. The paper felt clean. Money earned in a way that did not knot my stomach. The afternoon session filled with a different energy. A bride with a spreadsheet brain who wanted to understand pricing as much as design. A woman who said she is building a habit of pleasure after a hard divorce. A retired nurse with a calm voice and steady touch. 2 friends who finish each other's sentences. A florist from a small shop on the west side who wanted to trade techniques. We built again, turning in quarter turns, breathing in and out, lifting and tucking until 6 more bouquets found their balance. The florist asked how I talk to clients about limits without making it sound like a closed door. I told her I offer a clear table and 3 real choices instead of a menu that says yes to everything. People relax when the edges are honest. When the last ribbon was trimmed and the last chair folded, I stood by the sink and washed clippers and vases. My hands remembered the rhythm the way bodies remember a song from high school. Sophie dried each piece and nested them like bowls. She looked at me and said she had not seen me smile like this in a while. I realized she was right. The muscles in my face felt used in the good way. It is easy to forget that joy is a practice as much as a feeling. We loaded the hatchback and drove downtown to a branch of a credit union that works well with small businesses. I had brought my documents in a folder with tabs. Social Security card license, the simple registration for Desert Bloom Studio that I had filed in the spring, and a letter that assigns me an employer identification number. The banker asked the questions I expected. What services do you need? I said a basic checking account to separate business income and expenses, a savings account to gather tax money so April does not feel like a cliff, and a debit card. She typed softly and handed me temporary checks and a routing number written on a small card. The neatness of it made my shoulders ease. Boundaries on paper feel like rails on a trail. You can walk farther when you are not worried about falling. Next, we met the manager of a small studio space in South Phoenix. The building used to be a print shop and now holds a cluster of clean rooms with high windows and concrete floors. I walked through and touched the sink and asked about water pressure and ventilation and whether deliveries could come before 10. The manager explained the month-to-month terms and said I could paint if I like light colors better than the beige that came with the place. I pictured a work table against the wall shelves for ribbon and twine and a cooler for flowers once I can justify the cost. We signed a short lease that would let me leave if life shifted again. Sophie took a photo of me with the keys and made me promise to frame it. On the way back, I stopped at a copy shop and printed a stack of simple invoices with my new business name at the top. I bought a ledger book because even though I keep everything digital, I like the weight of ink and the way numbers line up by hand. I went home and put the envelope from the nursery into the new account and wrote the deposit in both places. I moved seed money from my personal checking into the business account and left it there untouched. The separation felt like a clean cut on a stem that drinks better after the angle is right. That evening, I sat at the dining table and opened a fresh folder for housing. I started gathering what a lender would ask when the time came. 2 years of tax returns. Bank statements. A letter that explains the transition from full shop owner to consultant and teacher. I read through FHA guidelines and made a list in calm language. Pre-approval target at the start of the year. Keep credit cards under 30%. Do not open any new lines I do not need. Build 6 months of expenses for comfort. I wrote a line to myself in larger letters. No deposit on a condo yet. Keep cash flexible while work ramps. An email arrived as I finished the list. The subject line had a name I did not recognize and a note about a winter wedding. Inside, the woman from class wrote that her sister had loved my feed and that they wanted to talk about an event near the canal in December. She asked if I could meet next week to walk through vision and budget. My hands stilled. Big projects come with their own weather, and I had promised myself to open the door only if the wind felt right. I wrote back yes to a conversation, yes to clarity, yes to a plan that fits the size of the day and the size of my life now. Sophie brought in a plate of sliced peaches and handed me one without a word. Juice ran down my wrist, and I laughed and reached for a napkin. The wind chime in the yard gave a little voice and went quiet again. I looked at the calendar on my phone and blocked time for next weekend's classes and for a walkthrough of the studio with a tape measure. I wrote pick up buckets and make a supply list and call the cooler repair guy to ask about used units that still have dignity. When the house settled into evening, I washed my hands again, liking the way the scent of lemon leaf clung to my palms. I checked the roster for next weekend and saw the word full again. I tucked the phone away and stood in the doorway to the yard. The sky over Phoenix held to a deep, clear blue. Somewhere past the palms a dog barked and then practiced silence. I thought of the morning class the way those bouquets found center when we turned our hands just a little and breathed. The studio keys rested on the counter like a small bell that had not yet been struck. I ran a finger along the tag and felt that tiny surge behind my ribs. Not fireworks, not a parade. More like a seed noticing it has water. I looked down and realized I had been smiling since I left the nursery. It sat easy on my face, not held there just there. Peace returns in small cups. Tonight it was enough. Sunwest wrote first. The subject line announced an intent to start default procedures if payments did not resume by a date that came too soon. The body of the message carried the particular chill of a form letter that has been perfected by lawyers. Amount past due. Options listed in tidy bullets that did nothing to soften the edges. At the bottom, a sentence about acceleration and a reminder that Arizona uses a trusty sale process if things go far enough. Linda forwarded it to me with a single line that read, "This feels like a cliff." I answered with the phone number for their loss mitigation department and a reminder that she and Dale could call to ask about timelines, but that I would not be placing calls on their behalf. By afternoon, Linda texted that she and Dale had met a real estate agent a friend of Patricia's had recommended, a woman with quick shoes and a voice like a coach. The agent had walked through the house with a yellow pad tapping walls with a knuckle and opening blinds to judge light. She had said the photos needed to be honest. No tricks, no filters, no hiding the water stain they were already handling with the insurer. She had suggested a list price that was lower than the number Linda had carried in her heart for years. Markets are what they are, the agent had said, and time costs money when letters arrive with words like default. The first week of September began with the photographer stepping backward through the doorway and making our rooms look wider with the kind of lens that knows how to flatter without lying. Linda set a bowl of lemons on the kitchen counter because she wanted the pictures to smell clean even though pictures do not smell. Dale wiped down the garage door and straightened rakes against the wall. Kayla packed up the desk in the den and said nothing about the echo the room made when boxes moved. Camelback Vista sent a final reminder that the weeds along the walk needed to be addressed and that the bins needed to be tucked away consistently. The fine was no longer small. Marla wrote in her efficient way that the next step would involve a hearing. Linda forwarded the message with a tired note and then another 15 minutes later that said handled. She had hired a kid down the block to pull weeds and run the bins in and out for a month. I pictured a teenager pushing the big can with one hand while wearing earbuds and felt oddly grateful for ordinary muscle. The yard sign went in on a Thursday. I saw it first in a photo from Jim, who likes to document neighborhood moments as if he were our archivist. The white post and the rectangular sign swayed in the late summer breeze. For sale. A smaller rider announced by appointment only. Patricia sent a reply in the thread that read, "Wishing the family an easy closing." She had moved from the language of gossip to the language of benediction, and it felt like a door closing softly instead of a slam. I drove the long way home from the studio that afternoon and turned down our old street. The light made the sidewalks bright as bone. The sign stood straight against the yard. The bougainvillea reached around it with a red little wave. I did not stop. I let the car roll slow and kept my hands steady on the wheel. In my head, I said a small blessing for the front steps and for the door that knew our knocks and for the hallway that held our secrets longer than it should have. Then I took the next corner and kept going. Showings began over the weekend. Linda texted that the agent had stacked 3 appointments on Saturday morning. She and Dale took the dog and drove around the neighborhood while strangers walked through the rooms and pictured where their couch would go. The first feedback came by email. A couple liked the light but worried about the roof history. Another wanted more yard for a future garden. A third liked everything except the price. It is always a collection of tiny reasons that make a person step toward a house or away from it. On Monday, SunWest sent another message. A reminder that the account remained delinquent and that a formal notice would be recorded if the arrearage was not cured. The date at the bottom marched closer with the rudeness of a calendar that does not care about human feelings. Linda asked if they should try to make a partial payment to buy time. I told her to ask the loss mitigation team what a partial would do and whether it would stop the recording of a notice. Then I set my phone down and counted my breaths to 4. The first offer arrived midweek. It came in under the list price by more than a little and included a note about the buyer's schedule and a request for a quick close. The agent called Linda and Dale and talked them through the math in a tone that balanced urgency and calm. If they waited, another offer might come and it might not. If the lender recorded a notice, the clock would begin and their leverage would thin. If they accepted this now, they could choose a close date that gave them time to move and avoid the heavy drape of a trustee sale timeline. Linda forwarded the email with the numbers and asked what I thought. My answer was the same sentence I had lived by for weeks. This decision belongs to the people on the deed. Kayla texted me separately. She said the offer was insulting and that waiting would fix it. She also wrote that her boss at Harper & Sage had cut her hours and that nights at the grocery were wrecking her sleep. I read the messages twice and put the phone down without answering. The world had decided it would answer on its own. That evening, I sat in the small studio and measured the wall for a shelf while my phone buzzed and then rested. The light outside had turned the color of honey. Somewhere, a train called out its lonely note. I went home, stirred a pot of soup with Sophie, and listened to Mason talk about the new rye he was experimenting with. The rhythm of other people's work is a balm when yours feels like a question. On Friday morning, I woke to a message from Linda that had been sent late. The subject line included the name of the agent and the word offer, then the word accepted. A second email arrived from the DocuSign system that showed their signatures digital and neat under language that said they agreed to sell to the buyer at the agreed price. A close date sat there like a small flag. 30 days. I felt a strange mix inside me. Relief because a path had been chosen. Grief because the path involved leaving, and something like release because dragging this decision across more days would have been another kind of loss. I drove by one more time at lunch. The sign now carried a smaller rider that said under contract. Jim was in his yard coiling a hose. He lifted his hand and I lifted mine. Patricia stood at the mailbox and pretended to straighten flyers. Her face had softened into something like kindness. I rolled down the window and said I hoped they were well. She nodded and said that houses hold stories and people hold the rest. Her voice skipped the part where she names any of us, and I appreciated how clean that felt. HOA sent a final reminder that any outstanding fines would need to be cleared before closing. The agent forwarded the email to Linda with a cheerful note that said better to settle it now than have it pop up on the final statement. Linda texted that she had paid it and that the account showed 0. I pictured the ledger closing a little clean door in a system I would never see. SunWest wrote again, but this time the note had a different tone. It acknowledged that a sale was pending and asked to be informed of the closing date so the loan could be paid off in full at the table. The word payoff felt like the last breath in a long bad dream. Linda responded with the date and the agent's contact information. I felt the urgency in my shoulders ease one notch. Kayla did not text me that day. Dale sent a short line that read, "Thank you for the library idea." He had found 2 small engine jobs from a neighbor who saw his card. I wrote back that the librarians are the unsung heroes of any town. He sent a smile I could hear through the screen. At dusk I parked a block away from our old street and walked to the corner. The rider, under the sign, fluttered a little in a breeze that came from nowhere. A child biked past with a string of beads sparkling on the spokes. The sky cooled into a calmer blue. I stood there and said the thing I needed to say where only I could hear it. "Be well." Then I turned around and walked back to my car. The agent called Linda the next morning to go over a list of small repairs the buyer had requested after inspection. Nothing dramatic. A loose handrail on the back steps. A bathroom fan that rattled. A patch of paint in the bedroom where the water stain had ghosted through. Linda and Dale agreed to hire a handyman for a day and offer a small credit at closing for the fan. The file moved forward. Papers snapped into place like a binder ring closing. When I checked my email that evening, I saw a final confirmation from the agent in my inbox because Linda had copied me. Offer accepted. Repairs negotiated. Closing scheduled for the first week of October. The words were plain and unadorned. They were exactly what the moment needed. I closed my laptop and sat for a while with my hands in my lap, palms up like a person ready to receive and also ready to let go. The title company smelled like copier paper and cold air. First week of October, Linda and Dale sat at one end of the long table with the agent, the buyers at the other, a notary in the middle with a stamp that clicked like a metronome. I waited in the lobby because there was nothing for me to sign. Through the glass, I saw Linda hold herself a little straighter each time a page turned. Dale rubbed the edge of the table with his thumb as if he could smooth out the month with one small motion. When the stamp landed for the last time, the notary gathered the papers and the agent shook hands with everyone in a circle that felt like a school play curtain call. The escrow officer printed the final settlement and slid it across to Linda. I saw her nod as the numbers got explained. Sunwest would be paid off at closing. Camelback Vista HOA fines would be satisfied in the disbursements. A small credit for the bathroom fan was noted. The keys shifted hands on the other side of the glass, and the door opened with a soft whoosh. Linda walked past me with the packet against her chest, and the agent behind her speaking the practical words about timelines and utilities and mail forwarding. Dale held the door like a gentleman at the end of a dance. We bowed to a place that had held our shape for a long time, and then we left it. They moved to Mesa at the end of the month. 1 bedroom in a small complex off Stapley that keeps its shrubs clipped into polite shapes. The owner is Victor Alvarez, a man in his 50s with an orderly clipboard and an efficient smile. He met them at the unit to hand over the keys and to point out the window stick that slides if you tug too hard and the breaker that likes to trip if the microwave and the toaster run at once. He asked for a proof of renter's insurance and set expectations around laundry room courtesy. He was not unkind. He was professional the way a clock is professional. Linda sent me a photo the day they unpacked. A narrow living room with a small tan sofa and a coffee table I recognized from our old house. A folding screen had been placed to make a sleeping corner for Kayla off the main room. The bedroom held a queen bed for Linda and Dale and a dresser. The kitchen was the kind that reminds you to stack your plates on purpose because there is no room for accidents. A sticky note rested on the fridge with the first of the month circled and the amount written in block letters. I knew whose hand had done that. Victor likes clarity. The first reminder came by email 3 days before rent was due. Victor sent a polite note to all tenants each month, a standard message that reviewed due dates, late fees, and where to drop checks if the office was closed. Linda forwarded it as if to show the tone of life now. That week, Kayla started a run of night shifts at the grocery in Tempe. She texted me briefly one afternoon that she was trying to get her body to sleep when the sun was up and that her eyes burned like the desert. I read the line and pictured her standing under fluorescent lights, pulling cases of canned beans and setting them into neat pyramids while the store radio played songs from last year. The image pricked me, and then I set it down. A letter arrived at my studio in South Phoenix on a Wednesday when the light through the high windows was soft enough to make dust look like glitter. The envelope carried my name in Kayla's careful hand. She writes like a person who wants to be taken seriously, each loop considered. Inside a page of lined paper torn from a notebook, the first paragraph apologized. The words said she had been under pressure when she spoke at the family meeting and that stress made her say cruel things. She wrote that she did not know the internet would be cut so quickly and that her work had been harmed. The second paragraph shifted toward a set of requests that read like items on a shopping list. If I could restart the internet for 3 months, it would give her time to rebuild clients. If I could cover part of the rent for 2 months, they would find their feet. She wrote that this would help the family and show that I did not mean to punish them. The last paragraph tried to braid confession and persuasion into something tight. She said she wanted to rebuild trust. She also suggested that when people love each other, they meet in the middle. I read the letter twice at the work table with the tape measure under my hand. I let my first reaction blow through me like air in a vent. Then I laid the paper flat and smoothed the fold. I thought about Rachel Ortiz and the fence she helped me see. I thought about words and how they hold up or collapse when you lean against them. I slid the letter into a plastic sleeve and filed it under family correspondence in my binder. Evidence is not a weapon. It is a map you can point to when strangers ask where you have been. That afternoon, Linda called. Her voice held the thin carefulness of someone who has been walking on gravel. She said the transition had been harder than she expected. Immediate neighbors were kind and the landlord clear. The space was small. She said she had seen Kayla sleeping on the sofa between shifts and wanted to tuck a blanket around her like she used to, but Kayla had pushed it away and rolled over. She said Dale had been driving to the library and answering emails in a low whisper so he did not wake anyone, and that the truck had started slow that morning as if it felt the change too. Then she told me about the letter and asked if I would consider the requests. She said she would be grateful and that she would not forget. The sentence carried the shape of a promise, not the substance. I told her I had read the letter and I would reply to Kayla in writing. I told her I loved her. I did not make pledges about anything else. In the evening, I sat at the small desk in the studio and wrote back to Kayla. I kept the message as brief as a label. I acknowledged that I had received her letter. I wrote that I accepted her apology for her words in March and that I hoped the new apartment would offer a fresh start. I wrote that I would not be restarting the internet or contributing to rent. I restated the boundary sentence that had become the spine for my days. I will pay for services that live under my name and belong to my life. I will not be a backup method of payment for households where I do not live. I suggested that she contact the public library for free computer access and community resources and that she call a financial counseling service offered through a nonprofit in Mesa. I included a phone number and hours for a reputable one. I closed with a wish that she would find steady work and steady rest. I sent it as an email so it would sit where other records sat. I got up and washed my hands to the wrists at the little sink. The room smelled faintly of eucalyptus from an arrangement I had made for a neighbor. I watched water run over my skin and thought about the way habits want to rebuild themselves like ivy. You cut them back and they come again looking for light and purchase. The trick is not to get angry at ivy. The trick is to keep pruning. The next morning brought a text from Kayla that did not read like thanks. The sentences charged in a rush and tried to pull me into a familiar ring. She wrote that she was drowning and that family is supposed to throw ropes. She wrote that I was the one with options and that my classes were a hobby. She wrote that I was mistaking pride for independence. I stood very still in the studio with the phone in my hand and the cooler humming beside me. I had a choice in that moment about what kind of conversation I wanted my life to hold. I set the phone on the table and let 20 minutes pass. Then I wrote a single line. Please send future requests by email. I will not respond to texts. I pressed send and opened the settings. I turned on the feature that silences her number. I did the same for late-night calls from unknown numbers because people who want to press on your boundaries will change masks when the first one fails. Victor emailed Linda a receipt when the first month's rent cleared. He added a reminder about the grace period for the next month and a note about a community refrigerator by the office that holds pantry items for tenants who might be between paychecks. The tone was steady and oddly human. Linda forwarded it to me with a line that read, "We will be fine." I wanted to believe her. I let the line stand without reply because I did not want to answer from a place of management or from a place of fear. I went to the studio window and watched traffic drift along the avenue. A city bus paused and exhaled and pulled away. A dog tugged a woman toward a patch of sun near the curb. I turned back to the work table and a sketch for a winter wedding near the canal. The bride's sister had written again and set a time for us to meet at the venue. I listed questions to ask about load-in and power and where the light falls at 5 in the afternoon. When I locked up at the end of the day, the air held that fall hush Phoenix gives you in exchange for surviving its summers. I tucked the family binder onto a high shelf where I could reach it but not bump it with my elbow. On the drive home, the sky moved through colors in slow bands. I did not swing by Mesa. I did not check next door. I did not think about notice periods or buckets under vents. I thought about ribbon and how it lies when it is cut clean and the ends are sealed and you hold it with the right gentle grip. At home, I opened my laptop and saw a delivery confirmation for the email to Kayla and an automatic reply from the nonprofit with a welcome packet. I filed both into the folder and closed the lid. I let my hands rest in my lap and breathe the way lungs do when the air in a room belongs to you. Then I reached for Sophie's mixing bowl and Mason's loaf pan and asked what needed chopping because sometimes the next right thing is not a sentence. It is dinner. The next few weeks quieted the way a street settles after a parade. Mason texted me a screenshot from next door with a short note that felt like a hand on a faucet. Marla had posted a reminder about HOA procedures and privacy. She explained in clean lines that first notices are meant to nudge and not to shame, that photos of private homes would be removed and that concerns belong with the office rather than in a public thread. The comments under her post shifted from curious to practical. Jim thanked the board for clarity. Patricia added a small note about watering early to save plants from shock. Then the thread slid out of view. The temperature of the neighborhood dropped without anyone naming the weather. At the studio, I tuned my attention to small work that adds up. I sorted ribbon by width and cleaned clippers and built supply lists that lived in my bag like steady friends. Word began to travel in the way it should through hands and eyes. A woman from the first class brought her sister. A bride from the afternoon session sent a coworker who needed calm more than flowers and got both. The nursery manager asked if I wanted to add a second Saturday, and I said yes because the roster filled with names I had not met yet. When I reached into the cool water for stems, my hands stopped trying to tremble. The winter wedding inquiry near the canal turned into a walk-through on a Sunday with high cold light. The venue sat just off Old Town Scottsdale, a space with white walls and polished concrete and a courtyard where the air held the faint smell of citrus. I met the bride and her sister and listened while they told me how they wanted the day to feel. They wanted low arrangements that let conversation breathe. They wanted candles that looked like warmth without being sticky. They wanted bouquets that could be held without hiding the women behind them. I laid out 3 clear options with real numbers and real limits. We stood in the courtyard and let the sun draw soft edges around everything. By the time we reached the parking lot, they said they wanted me to guide them, and I said I would. That evening the contract came back signed with a deposit that landed in my business account with a quiet ding. I wrote the number in my ledger and moved a slice of it into the tax savings line. The habit felt like a kind of respect. Classes continued. One morning, a retired nurse showed a natural grace with stems and asked if she could volunteer at a future workshop to help beginners. I said yes and felt that small click of community finding its shape. A florist from the West Side returned to trade tips and left with a new way to talk about budget without apology. After class, I drove back to the studio and stood inside the rectangle of sunlight on the floor and felt my shoulders loosen by degrees. When I was not teaching, I met with the winter wedding couple to finalize color and count. They sent a final list with table numbers, and I adjusted recipes until the math matched the room. I sent a purchase order for flowers and confirmed delivery windows, and reminded myself that the beauty would come from what we could carry, not from what we could not hold. By the end of the year, the studio walls had learned my routine. A pegboard held spools of twine, a shelf held tissue and tape. A jar near the sink collected the ends of ribbon I could not throw away and would use in some small way later. I began to think about the first weeks of the new year and how to make a lender believe me. Rachel had told me in October that lending is a language of evidence. I gathered pay stubs and bank statements and a simple letter that explained the shape of my work since I sold the shop and how this new version had found steady ground. January opened with clean air and a light that made the city look scrubbed. I made an appointment with a loan officer at a credit union that lives near the studio. The building's lobby had green plants that looked like they were taken seriously. The officer asked me to tell her about my business. I told her in the same tone I used to teach a class. Calm, specific, with my hands quiet on the table. She looked at the numbers and nodded and said we could try for an FHA pre-approval. I left with a list of documents to upload and a reminder to keep my credit cards below a third of their limit and to avoid opening any new accounts. I walked to my car with a folder under my arm that did not feel heavy at all. A week later, she called with good news that arrived in complete sentences. The pre-approval letter was ready. She sent it by email and I printed it on the studio printer that still smells like new plastic. I placed the letter in a sleeve and labeled the tab with the date. That night, Mason and Sophie clapped quietly in the kitchen and poured iced tea into small glasses like they were toasting with something stronger. We did not shout. We learned to enjoy proof. With the letter in my hand, I let myself look at listings in South Phoenix. I wanted a small place near the studio and near a park with grass that is honest about being desert grass. I did not want stairs. I did not want drama. I toured 3 units that smelled like paint and 2 that smelled like something else. The 4th unit felt right as soon as I stepped through the door. A 1-bedroom with a small balcony that faced a courtyard tree. The kitchen was exactly wide enough for 2 people, with one of them taking a step back. There was a closet that would hold more than it seemed to at first glance. The afternoon light landed on the wall like a hand. I called the agent listed for the unit and asked to see the disclosure packet. I ran the numbers twice. I wrote an offer that matched the market rather than the wish. I included the pre-approval letter and a clean timeline. The seller countered with a small adjustment and asked for a close at the end of the following month. I agreed. I wired a modest earnest money deposit that would be applied at closing if all went well and returned if the inspection revealed something bad enough to make me walk. I made an appointment for an inspector to meet me on a Thursday morning when the sun would be bright enough to show cracks if there were any. While these pieces moved forward, I kept teaching and planning. The winter wedding took shape inside my sketchbook with little arrows that showed how votives should pool on linen and where a sprig of something wild could rest without leaning toward chaos. The couple sent their final payment and thanked me for keeping the room simple. The deposit for a spring event arrived through a referral from someone who had taken a class and surprised herself. The calendar on the studio wall began to look like a trellis a vine could climb. Inspection day came with a chill that made my hands wish for warm water. The inspector walked the small condo with calm steps. He checked outlets and faucets and peered into the panel and ran water long enough to know if a drain would sulk. He found a loose handrail on the balcony and a slow fan in the bathroom and a note about a valve that would prefer attention. He wrote his report in clear language with photos that did not pretend. I asked the agent to request a small credit for the fan and a repair for the handrail. The seller agreed to both without theater. The appraisal followed and landed right on value, no drama at all. The loan officer asked for 2 more documents and then wrote the words "conditional approval" in an email that made me breathe a little deeper. Through all of this, Nextdoor stayed quiet on matters that were not mine. Marla posted about a yard sale and a lost dog that found its porch. Jim shared a photo of a sunset from the end of our old street, and Patricia commented that the light looked kind. I read these small posts and felt the rightness of being a neighbor at a distance. The studio brought its own surprises. A corporate client asked for 6 arrangements once a month for a lobby and a conference room. They said they found me because their receptionist took a class and liked the way I talked about air between stems. I drafted a simple service agreement, listed delivery windows and vase returns, and they signed it without fuss. Another page went into the binder under steady income. One afternoon, after a consultation at the venue in Scottsdale, the bride handed me a folder with the signed scope and a check. The sun had fallen behind the building, and the courtyard held that early evening hush you get on good days. I walked to my car and sat with the folder in my lap. The contract had my business name at the top and my signature at the bottom, and it felt like it fit. It was my first wedding under the new brand as a full-service consultant. I drove back to the studio and unlocked the door and set the folder on the work table like a small ceremony. Then I carried a chair to the balcony and took my sketchbook and a soft pencil and drew peonies and roses and eucalyptus, the way I see them when a room has been set right. That hour on the balcony passed without a need to narrate it to myself. The pencil moved and the lines made sense. The air tasted clean. The traffic on the avenue below came and went like waves you cannot see. When the light thinned, I went inside and washed my hands and put the sketchbook on the shelf where work in progress rests. The email from the loan officer chimed with a list of items for final review. I wrote myself a note on a yellow square to scan 2 more documents in the morning. I let the room go quiet again. The studio and the future sat together without arguing. I stood there long enough to feel gratitude come up from the floor. Then I turned out the light and locked the door and walked home by the long way so the night could do what it does with a person who is finally not running. Morning brought a thin stripe of light across the studio floor and the kind of quiet that helps a person decide. I scanned the last documents the loan officer needed and uploaded them. Then stood with my hands on the work table and let the calendar settle into place in my head. 3 days had been the hard line where one life ended and another began. 2 weeks had taught me that consequences arrive even when you do not invite them. 3 months had carried the sale of a house and the loosening of a knot I had kept tied for too long. 1 year stood there waiting steady and plain, an invitation to build without asking permission. January slid into February with lists and confirmations. The lender asked 2 more questions than 1. The inspection repairs were completed and photographed. The appraisal held. The email that arrived on a Tuesday afternoon used the phrase "clear to close," and I read it twice to feel it land. I signed the last set of disclosures at the studio table where my ledger lives, then walked outside and called Mason and Sophie to say that it was time to buy a few moving boxes. They answered like people who knew we had reached the place on the map where the trail evens out. Closing day in June felt different from the title office months earlier. This time the name on the papers was mine. The notary clicked the stamp with a rhythm that made me smile. I slid my hand across the page to make the ink dry and thought about all the lists that had led to this table. When the keys touched my palm, they made a small sound, not a cheer, more like a bell you hear through a door. I carried them out to the parking lot and pressed them into my pocket and stood there for one long breath before driving to the condo. The unit smelled like paint and sunlight. I opened the balcony door and the courtyard tree offered a little green breath. The kitchen held a neat row of cabinets that looked cleaner than anything I had used in years. I set a single bowl and a single plate on the counter and poured water into a glass from the sink and drank it standing up because I could not wait to sit. The living room needed a rug and the bedroom needed a lamp, and none of that felt urgent. I placed a small framed photo on the counter to watch me while I carried in boxes. It showed the first peonies from my class, full and kinda record of a day when a room learned to breathe again. Moving did not require a caravan. Sophie drove the hatchback, Mason brought a dolly, and I rented a small van for 3 hours. We brought the cooler that would fit the corner by the balcony door, the folding table that would be a desk, and the bin of ribbon I cannot bear to leave in storage. I laid out the tools of work first because that is how my head studies. Later I slid a clean set of sheets over the mattress and placed a book on the nightstand as if that small gesture could establish a home. In the evening, we ate pizza on the floor, and Mason told a story about a customer who cried when a loaf of bread tasted like last summer. We laughed, and the sound did not echo. The walls had already begun to learn me. Life in the new place assembled itself like a bouquet made of ordinary stems. I learned the timing of the buses on the avenue and the way late light falls on the courtyard tree. I kept shoes by the door for a quick walk when my head crowded. The studio sat a short drive away, close enough to feel like a breath, far enough to make me appreciate each threshold. Some nights I took the long way home and let the city lines unspool without asking anything of me. Family life shifted into its own rhythm. Linda sent a text every few weeks, short and clean. A note about a checkup that went fine. A picture of a potted plant on the mesa balcony, small and stubborn. Sometimes a sentence about a book she had finished. The messages arrived without conditions, and I answered in kind. I did not ask for news of bills or landlords. She did not ask me to carry anything. We had found a way to be mother and daughter without turning me into a net. Dale spoke through Mason one afternoon while we were setting up tables for a workshop. Mason said he had run into Dale in a parking lot near the library and that Dale had stopped him with a hand on his arm. He had said to tell me he was sorry for the years of quiet when a father should have made a different sound. Mason relayed the words without commentary, and I stood with my hand on a stack of buckets and felt the apology land where it needed to. I wrote later that night that I received the message and that I hoped the library stayed generous with the air conditioning. Dale wrote back a single line about the kindness of librarians. It was enough. Kayla kept her distance. There were no long messages after the last exchange, only an occasional update that came through Linda by accident, the way weather reports come through screen doors. Night shifts had been replaced by a morning schedule. An online client returned. She was tired and working and trying. I let that picture sit on my shelf without adding a frame. We were two women raised in the same house now, learning to live without using each other as ladders. Work held me in a way that did not feel like a trap. The winter wedding near the canal unfolded on a clear evening that smelled like orange peel. The room glowed without shouting. The women held their bouquets at a height that let their faces be seen. Later, a corporate client extended their arrangement contract for another quarter. The workshop roster filled and refilled. I learned to lift boxes with my knees and to plan deliveries so I could eat something real in the car. Small stability arrived and stayed. On a quiet Sunday, I walked through the condo and hung 3 things that made the rooms tell the truth. The photo of the first peonies from class went above the desk where I sketch. A calendar with fat squares that asked to be written on went by the front door. A small framed page that held a sentence I had written in pencil long before I knew I would frame it hung near the kitchen. It read in my own hand that a boundary is a gift for both sides. It sounded like advice and also like relief. I noticed that my breath had a new shape. It did not hold itself at the top of my chest waiting for the next message. It went all the way in and then all the way out. I noticed that silence did not feel like a test anymore. It felt like a room I could sit in without counting. I noticed that the word home had shrunk to fit this small place and in shrinking had become truer. Spring turned to early summer and the studio windows learned when to invite the wind and when to shut it out. The lender sent a final packet with a neat schedule and I made each payment on time, like laying a tile in a mosaic. I kept my credit cards below where the loan officer had asked me to keep them. I put tax money into a separate account even when it looked prettier in the main one. Boring habits built a bright kind of freedom. Linda visited once with a bag of lemons from a friend of Patricia's, Pas. We sat on the balcony with cold water, and the leaves made soft shadows on our knees. She looked at the photo of the peonies and told me it made her want to buy grocery flowers and take them apart to see how they worked. We spoke around the old house without entering it, the way hikers circle a place they know is dangerous and keep to the path. Before she left, she touched the door frame with the tips of her fingers like a person saying a small prayer. She said she was proud of the work I had done. It did not fix the past. It did not need to. On the day I made the first mortgage payment, I walked to the park and sat on a bench with my ledger and wrote the amount in ink. I watched a girl learn to ride a bicycle while a father jogged beside her with 2 fingers on the seat. She wobbled and then steadied and then pedaled ahead on her own without looking back. He slowed and let his hands fall. A person behind me on another bench clapped once, a soft sound that felt like respect. I closed the ledger and carried that scene home like something fragile that needed both hands. That night I wrote the last page in the binder that had held 5 years of bills and notes and proof. I titled it in small letters so it would not show off. 3 days drew the line. 2 weeks showed the shape of consequence. 3 months brought a sale and a choice to be active instead of being dragged. 1 year built a life that did not ask anyone for permission to exist. Under those lines, I wrote one more sentence. I do not hold the door for anyone who tells me I am the problem while I pay to keep the lights on. It was not a threat, it was a boundary shaped like a truth. I set the binder on a high shelf and stood in the kitchen for a long minute with my palms on the counter edge. The peonies in the photo looked like they were still breathing. The evening air carried a faint song from a radio someone left open on a balcony 2 floors over. The city hummed the way a city hums when it is not waiting for drama, only for weather. If you have stayed with me to this last page, thank you. Tell me the city you are listening from and what time it is there right now. Share one moment when you set a boundary and felt yourself come back into your own body. If this story gave you a place to breathe, subscribe so we can keep meeting here for the quiet kind of justice and the plain dignity of self-respect.